Most people have read the words of Jesus 100 times and missed the most important thing hidden inside them. In the Gospel of John, Jesus makes 7 declarations that begin with the same 2 words. And those words are not a simple pronoun in a verb. They are an activation code, one that was recognized immediately by every mystic, every Gnostic, every initiate in the ancient world. The moment Jesus said, "I am the light of the world," he was not describing himself as a person standing in a room. He was pointing to something inside you, a sleeping fire that Orthodox religion was never designed to awaken. For 2,000 years, these 7 declarations have been read as theological statements, when in truth they are maps of consciousness, drawn in sacred language. By the end of this video, you will never read these words the same way again. And that shift will be permanent. To understand why the 7 I am declarations carry such extraordinary weight, you have to begin at the beginning, not of John's Gospel, but of the tradition it was written within. The Gospel of John is universally acknowledged by scholars, both mainstream and esoteric, as the most mystical of the 4 canonical Gospels. Unlike Matthew, Mark, and Luke, which share a common narrative framework, John reads like a different kind of document entirely. It begins not with a birth story, but with a cosmological prologue that would have made perfect sense to any educated Alexandrian Gnostic of the 1st and 2nd centuries. The opening verses in the beginning was the Logos, and the Logos was with God. And the Logos was God are not theological warm-up material. They are a declaration of ontological reality, a statement about the nature of consciousness itself before it took form. The word Logos, which most Bibles translate simply as word, carried an entire universe of meaning in the Hellenistic world. It meant divine reason, the ordering principle of creation, the first emanation of the unknowable source that Gnostic traditions called the pleroma, the fullness. When John places Jesus inside this framework from his very first sentence, he is not writing biographer, he is writing cosmology. This context is everything, because when Jesus begins his 7 I am declarations in the chapters that follow, they are not the words of a historical teacher describing his ministry. They are the voice of the Logos itself, the divine principle that descends into matter, enters human form, and then speaks from within that form to awaken the same divine principle sleeping inside the listener. Every Gnostic school that encountered this gospel heard it exactly this way. The Valentinians, the Sethians, the followers of Basilides, all of them recognized in John's SIM statements the language of divine self, not personal autobiography. The Church standardized one reading, but there was always another one running underneath, older and deeper, passed down through initiates who knew how to listen between the lines. I am the bread of life. First of the 7 declarations appears in John chapter 6, and it arrives in a charged context. Jesus has just multiplied loaves and fish for a crowd of thousands. The crowd, predictably, wants more bread, and Jesus pivots with a statement that should have stopped everyone in their tracks. I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. Read literally. This is a strange and somewhat grandiose claim, but read through Gnostic eyes, it becomes a precise instruction about the nature of spiritual nourishment. In the ancient world, bread was not simply food, it was the fundamental symbol of life sustained, of the material world made sacred. When the Hebrew tradition spoke of manna in the wilderness, the bread that fell from heaven, it was describing a mystery. The idea that divine sustenance flows downward from the pleroma into the world of matter, feeding not the physical body, but the pneuma, the spiritual spark trapped inside it. Jesus claiming to be this bread is not a metaphor about church communion. It is a statement about what the Logos actually is in relation to the soul. It is the substance that the divine spark inside you as its own kind, its own source, its own home. The Gnostic teachers who commented on this passage understood that coming to the bread of life was not an act of belief in the theological sense. It was an act of recognition. Gnosis itself, the soul, imprisoned in the material world, starving not for food, but for remembrance of its divine origin, encounters the Logos and is nourished back to wakefulness. You do not simply eat the bread. You recognize that you are made of the same substance. That recognition, that moment of interior awakening, is the meal Jesus is describing. And it is a meal, the Gnostic said, that Orthodox religion keeps perpetually just out of reach, offering the ritual without ever explaining what the ritual is pointing toward. What you've learned here is only the surface. There's an older, more powerful layer behind these words. If something inside you felt that pull, the path is pinned in the first comment. The second declaration, I am the light of the world, appears twice in John's Gospel, which is itself significant. The Gnostic tradition did not treat this repetition as literary redundancy. It treated it as emphasis, a signal that this particular I am carries double weight. Light in Gnostic cosmology is not a poetic metaphor. It is the fundamental substance of the pleroma, the realm of divine fullness that existed before the material world fell into being. The demiurge, the flawed creator-god of Gnostic myth, built the physical universe from inferior materials, trapping fragments of divine light inside matter. Jesus declaring himself to be the light of the world is, from a Gnostic perspective, the Logos announcing its own nature to the very sparks it came to retrieve. The third declaration shifts the register, I am the door. This one confuses modern readers, because it sounds almost architectural, but in the initiatory traditions of the ancient world, the door was one of the most powerful symbols available. Mystery schools across the Mediterranean, Eleusinian, Orphic, Mithraic, all structured their initiations around the concept of crossing a threshold. The uninitiated stood on one side, the awakened stood on the other. There was a door between them, and the knowledge of how to open it was the entire purpose of the tradition. Jesus claiming to be the door is not modesty, it is an initiatory map. The Logos itself is the threshold between unconscious material existence and awakened pneumatic life. Fourth I am the Good Shepherd, carries an equally layered meaning. The shepherd in ancient Near Eastern culture was not simply a herder of animals. The shepherd was the one who knew each creature individually, who called them by name, who could distinguish the genuine flock from the strays. In Gnostic anthropology, humanity is divided into three categories of soul. The hylic, bound entirely to matter. The psychic, capable of partial awakening. And the pneumatic, carrying the full divine spark capable of complete gnosis. The Good Shepherd, who calls his own sheep by name, is the Logos, recognizing and calling the those whose inner light is bright enough to hear the voice of their own divine origin, speaking through the words of a man standing in ancient Judea. If you feel drawn to go further, a complete and structured path already exists with the correct sound, full meaning, and sacred protocol of these words. The door is open. Check. The first comment, the fifth and sixth I am. Resurrection and divine declaration arrives in one of the most dramatic scenes in all of John's Gospel. Lazarus has died. His sisters are grief-stricken. And in that moment, Jesus makes a statement that seems, on the surface, to be about miraculous power over death. I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. Mainstream Christianity has read this as a promise of bodily resurrection at the end of time, but the Gnostic reading is both older and far more immediate. The resurrection being spoken of here is not a future event. It is happening in the present moment, inside the person hearing the words. In Gnostic theology, the death that matters is not physical death. The true death is the amnesia of the divine spark, the soul so deeply embedded in matter that it has forgotten its origin entirely. This is what the Gnostics called the sleep of the pneuma, a death more profound than anything biological, because it is the death of self. The resurrection, then, is the awakening of that forgotten self. When Jesus says he is the resurrection, he is not making a promise about corpses rising from graves. He is describing what happens when the Logos enters a soul that has forgotten itself. The divine spark remembers, stirs, rises from its own unconsciousness. The raising of Lazarus in the narrative is a public demonstration of something that happens invisibly, in the interior life of the pneumatic soul. At the moment of the sixth I am the vine. You are the branches shifts from individual awakening to relational cosmology. In the Valentinian Gnostic tradition, the pleroma is understood as an interconnected system of divine emanations, each one flowing from the source and nourishing the ones that come after it. The vine is the perfect organic metaphor for this structure. The branches do not create their own life. They receive it from the vine. They are not separate organisms that happen to touch the vine. They are extensions of the same living system, fed by the same root, expressing the same essential life in different forms. For the Gnostic reader, this declaration is a map of the soulless relationship to the Logos, not the relationship of a worshipper to a distant deity, but the relationship of a branch to the vine it literally grows from.
The seventh I am, the way, the truth, and the life declaration is the most quoted and, arguably, the most misunderstood sentence in the entire New Testament. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. For centuries, this verse has been wielded as a theological exclusion clause, the scriptural basis for claiming that salvation belongs only to those within a specific religious institution. But if you strip away 2,000 years of institutional interpretation and return to the document as a Gnostic initiate of the 2nd century would have read it, something entirely different emerges. The way, in Greek hodos, was not merely a road. In Hellenistic philosophy and in the mystery traditions, the way referred to the path of return, the journey of the soul back toward its divine source, through layers of ignorance, through the archons that guard the material realm, through the process of awakening that Gnostics called the return to the pleroma. Jesus naming himself as the way is the Logos declaring itself to be the navigational principle, the inner guide that the pneumatic soul uses to find its way back through the cosmic architecture to its origin. The truth, aletheia in Greek, was equally charged. For Plato and for the Gnostics who inherited his framework, truth was not a set of propositions, but the very reality of the divine world, as opposed to the shadow world of matter. And the life, in Greek zoe, was the specific word used for divine, eternal, uncreated life, as opposed to bios, the biological life of the physical body. When Jesus says he is the Zoe, he is speaking of the same uncreated light that existed before the demiurge fashioned the material world from inferior substances. As for no one comes to the Father except through me, the Gnostic reading is not exclusionary at all. It is a statement about the mechanics of awakening. The only path back to the unknowable source, the Father beyond all fathers, runs directly through the activation of the Logos within the soul, not through an institution, not through a creed, through the interior recognition of the divine principle that this entire gospel has been pointing toward from its very first word. You have just moved through one of the most layered documents in all of ancient literature, not as a religious text, but as a map. What the Gospel of John encodes in its 7 I am declarations is not a theology of divine personhood. It is a curriculum of interior awakening, designed by people who understood that the deepest truths cannot be handed to a person. They can only be unlocked from within. Each declaration points to a different facet of the same fundamental reality, that the Logos, the divine ordering principle of all existence, did not merely visit the earth in human form. It spoke directly to the part of you that is made of the same substance as itself. The bread of life nourishes the pneuma. The light of the world illuminates the amnesia of the sleeping soul. The door marks the threshold of initiation. The Good Shepherd knows you by the name your divine nature carries, not the name written on your birth certificate. The resurrection names what happens when the divine spark inside you wakes from its material dream. The vine describes the living connection between your soul and its source, a connection that was never broken, only forgotten. And the way, the truth, and the life maps the full trajectory of return, from the confusion of material existence, through the recognition of divine reality, into the uncreated life that preceded everything the demiurge ever built. This is what the Gnostics heard when they read John. This is what they transmitted to each other in their schools, their communities, their sacred texts found at Nag Hammadi. And this is what has been waiting quietly inside one of the most widely distributed books in human history for the reader who is ready to look beneath the surface. The complete teaching of the first 2 sacred Aramaic words. Their power, correct sound, and full protocol of use is now available. Check the first comment to access it. If this video opens something in you, share it with one person who is ready to hear it. Subscribe and leave a comment below. Which of the 7 I am declarations struck you most deeply, and why? That conversation is how the gnosis moves from one awakened mind to the next.